I always believed my father loved me, even if he struggled to show it. He was never warm in the way some dads were, never one for hugs or long talks or weekend camping trips. But he was present. He came to my school plays, even if he never clapped as hard as the other parents. He helped me move into my college dorm, even if he didn't stay long. He sent me birthday cards every year, and while they only said, "Love, Dad," in small, careful handwriting, they still meant something to me. They were proof. He was still trying, and I clung to those proofs like someone clutching a letter in a storm, desperate not to let it fly away. My mom died when I was 12. Cancer. It came fast, brutal, almost indecent in how it erased her presence from our home. My dad took the loss hard, or at least I think he did. He didn't talk about it. He just came home later, drank more coffee than usual, and paced around the house like a ghost of himself. We learned to live in the silence together, not because we wanted to, but because it was the only thing we had left in common. When I was 17, he met Angela. She was 20 years younger than him, wore pencil skirts and glossy lipstick, and laughed like the world owed her joy. I didn't dislike her. At first. She seemed nice enough. But there was a tightness in her smile when she looked at me, like I was the leftover from another meal, a dish she hadn't ordered but was expected to finish. I knew how people looked at stepchildren. I'd seen the movies. I told myself not to be dramatic. The wedding happened in the spring. I wore a blue dress that felt like a mistake the second I stepped out of the car. Everyone else wore pastels, and Angela's family looked at me like I had wandered into the wrong photo. My dad looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in years, and some petty, childlike part of me hated him for it. I stood there, hands clenched around a bouquet of fake flowers, and listened to him say vows about forever, about building a life with her, about partnership. I thought about how he never said those words at Mom's funeral. He just stood next to her coffin and stared. I moved out the following summer. Dad didn't offer much. He didn't help me look for places. He didn't help me pack. He gave me a check with a few $100s and said, "Good luck, kid." I remember folding it twice and sliding it into my wallet like it was some sacred object. I don't know why I still wanted to impress him. For years, we were something like strangers. With matching DNA, I'd call on holidays. He'd forget my birthday once or twice. Angela never missed a chance to send me a card, usually with some passive-aggressive joke about how she was keeping him in line. I smiled through it, gritted my teeth, tried to be the good daughter. Then, last spring I got a call from one of his friends, David, someone I barely knew but who recognized me from barbecues years ago. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you knew. Your dad passed away 2 days ago. Heart attack. Quick." The air left my body like I'd been kicked. No one had told me. Angela hadn't called. She hadn't even texted. I felt something inside. Me crack, not from grief, but from a different kind of hurt. Colder, stranger. I sat in my car outside the grocery store, watching the shopping bags melt in the heat, wondering how the world was still moving. The funeral was small. Closed casket. Angela wore black like it was a fashion statement. She smiled at me, all teeth and venom, and said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I looked her in the eye and didn't say a word. I wasn't sure either. A week later, the lawyer called me in for the reading of the will. I didn't expect much. I wasn't greedy. I just wanted something. An old watch, a photo, a piece of paper with his handwriting. Something that said, I mattered. Something that said I wasn't just the first chapter in a book he'd tossed aside, but the will was short. Clinical. His assets, his house, his savings, his car, everything were left to Angela. And me? I wasn't even mentioned. Not once. Not by name, not by title. Just heir. My fingers trembled as I signed the papers, not because of what I'd lost, but because of what I'd never had. A father who chose me, a man who remembered, a man who cared enough to say goodbye. Angela watched me with a smirk. "He thought you'd understand," she said softly, pretending to console me, her hand lightly touching my arm like she owned even that. I left the office shaking. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I drove home, parked in front of my apartment, and sat there for hours, watching people walk by with groceries, with dogs, with their lives whole and untarnished. And then I made a decision. I opened my laptop. I wrote down everything, every word, every memory, every cruel silence, every sharp smile Angela ever gave me, every absence my father offered like a punishment. I didn't care how it sounded. I just wrote. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my eyes blurred with tears I refused to wipe away. I wrote until the sun slipped down and the only light left was the screen glowing cold against my face. I didn't edit it. I didn't sweeten it. I didn't make my father better than he was, and I didn't make myself smaller to make the story easier to swallow. I told the truth, the messy, aching, ugly truth, and when I finished, I sat there breathing like I had just run a marathon with no one, waiting at the finish line. The next morning, I sent it to the local news. No fancy publication, no glossy magazine, just the town paper, the one that published high school football scores and 4th of July parades. I attached a short message. I think the people in this town should know who they are applauding at. The next charity event. I didn't know if they would read it. I didn't know if they would care. But it felt like throwing a bottle into the ocean, and for once, I didn't care if it ever washed back to me. 2 days later, the editor replied. Her message was brisk, professional, but there was an undercurrent of sympathy in her words. "Would you be willing to speak on record?" she asked. "We think this story could resonate with a lot of people." I sat there staring at the screen, feeling a tremor of fear rise in my gut. Going public meant more than just venting into a void. It meant standing under the light, naked and judged. But then I thought of Angela's smirk. I thought of my father's blank will. I thought about the years I spent trying to earn crumbs of affection like a child begging at a closed door. I wrote back one word. Yes. The article went live 3 days after that. My name was right there at the top, not hidden, not softened, just exposed in the bold black font. Daughter left out of father's will speaks out about betrayal and family secrets. It was surreal. Seeing my own story stripped and laid out for everyone to read felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I imagined the people from my town, people who had nodded at my father at church, who had shaken Angela's hand at fundraisers, reading my words over their morning coffee. I imagined their mouths tightening, their brows furrowing, imagined the moment when admiration curdled into suspicion. The response was immediate. My phone buzzed nonstop for the next 24 hours. Some old friends messaged me things like, "I always thought something was off about her," or, "I'm so sorry. You went through that." Some people were cruel, of course. Strangers accusing me of bitterness, of greed, of trying to tarnish a man's legacy because I hadn't gotten a bigger check. Those messages stung like fresh cuts, but they didn't stop me. Not this time. Didn't owe anyone my silence anymore. Angela's reaction came swiftly and venomously. She sent me a cold, furious email, packed with legal threats she probably copy-pasted from some online template. She accused me of slander, of libel, of trying to destroy the memory of a good man. She said my father had loved me in his own way, and that I was selfish, petty, cruel for making my grief public. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to the paper's editor, who calmly assured me they had already vetted the article with their legal team. Everything I said was my experience, my memory, my truth. I was protected. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Then the phone call came. It was from a woman named Carol, someone who had known my father long before Angela, long before I was even born. She told me she had read the article, and that there were things I needed to know. Things that had been hidden from me by everyone who claimed to love me. Her voice was shaky, like she wasn't sure if she should be doing this, but determined all the same. Your father wasn't always the man you knew, she said. There are things Angela didn't tell you, things about what he did. To you, to your mother. I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles going white. What are you talking about? I whispered, my throat dry. There was a pause on the line so long I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, and every word she said felt like another thread snapping inside me, unraveling the version of my life I thought I knew. It turned out that Angela wasn't just a new chapter in my father's life. She had been part of his world even before my mother died, lingering in the background, a shadow with bright lipstick and sharp nails. Carol told me about nights my father didn't come home, about whispered arguments behind closed doors, about my mother crying in the kitchen when she thought no one could hear. He wasn't faithful, Carol said. Not to your mother. Not to anyone. I sat there, the world tilting around me, trying to fit this jagged new puzzle piece into the empty spaces of my childhood memories. Had my mother known? Had she stayed out of love, out of fear, out of resignation? Had my father's grief been real, or just guilt? And what about Angela? Had she been waiting in the wings all along, counting down the years until she could legally take my mother's place? The thought made my stomach turn. When I finally hung up the phone, I stared at the blank wall across from me, my mind racing. I wasn't sure if I hated my father or pitied him. I wasn't sure if I hated Angela or the younger version of myself, who had wanted so badly to believe I was still loved. I thought publishing the article would be the end of it. I thought it would be my closure. But it was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of emotions I couldn't name, crashing against me like a storm that refused to pass. I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my hands clawing at the sheets, as if somewhere deep in sleep, I had wandered back into that house, into that life, into that hollowed-out family I never truly belonged to. I found myself replaying every conversation with my father, every small, sharp moment that I had once explained away as distance or grief or his way of loving. Now they felt different, heavier, poisoned. The article spread beyond my small town, faster than I could have imagined. People from the next cities over were sharing it, commenting, sending messages of support and some of pure, cold judgment. Local radio stations mentioned it during their morning hours, weaving my story between traffic reports and weather updates. It felt surreal, like living two lives at once, the quiet, angry one behind my apartment door, and the loud, chaotic one, being lived out by my name on thousands of strangers' tongues. Angela, for her part, didn't disappear. She doubled down. She gave interviews to other papers, tearfully painting herself as the devoted wife of a flawed but loving man, spinning a narrative where I was the vengeful, estranged daughter who couldn't accept that families change. Her words were sugar-coated knives. She smiled for cameras and played the part well, handkerchief clutched delicately in her hand, her voice breaking in carefully timed places. I watched her performances from my couch, sickened and fascinated, like watching a house I used to live in burning down and knowing I couldn't, or wouldn't, stop it. People started digging. Journalists, online sleuths, even a few nosy neighbors. They found inconsistencies in Angela's story. Financial records. That didn't add up. Charity donations that never reached their intended causes. Rumors of affairs. And slowly, the public began to turn. It was a small vindication, not enough to stitch up the bleeding places inside me, but enough to make breathing easier. One morning, a thick envelope arrived in the mail, the kind lawyers send when they want you to sit down before you read. I hesitated before opening it, my heart hammering like it knew bad news was coming. Inside were documents I could barely process. Bank statements, property transfers, a messy paper trail that revealed Angela had been siphoning money from my father's accounts for years before his death. Tens of thousands of dollars, hidden, away, funneled into private accounts with fake names and addresses. I laughed when I saw it, a sharp, broken sound that hurt my throat. Not because it was funny, but because it was all so disgustingly inevitable. Attached to the documents was a short note from a new lawyer, not the one Angela had hired, but a firm hired by someone else, David, my father's old friend, who had seen my story and decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He had found the papers among his own files, papers my father had asked him to hold on to, just in case. I wondered if, deep down, my father had known Angela would betray him too. If he had suspected that the woman who smiled so sweetly for the world would gut him when no one was looking. Maybe he had thought this hidden evidence would protect his legacy. Maybe he had thought I would never find it. But I had. And now I had a choice. I could take it to court, challenge the will, expose Angela not just to whispers and internet gossip, but to real, tangible consequences. The lawyer said it would be messy, expensive, brutal, public. It could drag on for years, with no guarantee I would win. But even if I lost, the world would see her for what she really was. The idea thrilled me and terrified me, because somewhere, beneath the anger, the betrayal, the thirst for justice, was still that small girl who just wanted a father who loved her. And suing his widow, no matter how monstrous she was, felt like closing a door I wasn't sure I was ready to shut forever. I sat with the papers spread around me on the floor, the cold edge of reality cutting deeper than I expected. My father had made his choices. Angela had made hers. And now it was my turn. I thought about my mother, how she had lived with disappointment, with broken promises, how she had stayed silent until the cancer silenced her completely. I thought about the nights I had cried myself to sleep in a house, filled with the heavy, suffocating quiet of unspoken things. I wouldn't be silent. Not anymore. I picked up my phone and called the lawyer. "I want to move forward," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I want the truth to come out." There was a long pause, a deep breath on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" he asked gently, like he already knew the answer. I closed my eyes and saw Angela's smirk, my father's blank signature on the will, my mother's tired smile in old photographs. "I'm sure." As I hung up the phone, I realized something I hadn't dared admit to myself before. This wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even really about Angela. It was about reclaiming my story, the one they tried to erase, the one they tried to rewrite without me in it. It was about finally being seen. The lawsuit exploded like a match in a dry forest. News outlets picked it up almost immediately, calling it the inheritance war and small-town scandal between widow and daughter. Headlines spread like wildfire, twisting my grief into entertainment. I became the subject of talk shows, the object of curiosity for people who had never known my name before it was tied to a courtroom drama. Strangers emailed me, sent letters, some offering support, others eager to share their own pain, their own stories of being cut out, left behind, forgotten. There was something beautiful in it, something aching and deeply human. The way people reached for each other in the dark, trying to say, "I see you." Me too. Angela fought with the elegance of a viper. She showed up to court in black suits and pearls, with a legal team polished and precise. She cried on the stand, claimed she had been a mother to me, said she never stopped loving me, that my father was a difficult man, that I had pulled away, broken his heart, refused to accept his new marriage. She played her role like a seasoned actress, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But the documents told another story. The money trails, The shady accounts, the witness statements from people who had worked with her, former employees, former friends, people who had seen her cruelty behind closed doors, who had heard her complain about me, mock my father, laugh, about how easy it was to take over. My lawyer laid the pieces down one by one, like a mosaic of truth forming beneath the courtroom lights. And when it was my turn to speak, I stood with shaking hands and a spine made of something I hadn't known I carried. I told them everything, not just about the money or the will, but about the cold years, the silence, the abandonment. I spoke of my father not as a monster, but as a man who failed me, a man who had loved me in a language I couldn't understand, until it was too late. I wept. I broke. And I kept speaking. The courtroom was quiet when I finished, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath, like the edge of a cliff. The verdict didn't come quickly. Weeks passed, heavy with waiting. During that time, I stayed off social media, walked the long streets of my childhood town, visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. I sat beside her in the cold air, fingers curled around a paper, coffee cup, and whispered everything into the soil. I told her I missed her, that I wished she were here, that I was sorry for not seeing it sooner, for letting them both disappear before I found my voice. And then one morning, the call came. We had won. The court ruled that the will had been manipulated, that the financial discrepancies were too significant to ignore. Angela would be investigated for fraud. My father's estate was to be reevaluated, redistributed. I would receive what was rightfully mine, not just the money, but his old journals, the deed to the cabin he and my mother had once loved, the photographs he kept hidden in drawers I'd never opened, pieces of him I had thought were gone forever. I didn't cry when I heard the verdict. I felt something different, not relief, not joy, something quieter, deeper, like being unburied. Angela left town soon after. Rumors said she moved across. The country changed her name, started over. I didn't care. She no longer haunted my dreams, no longer sat behind my eyelids when I closed my eyes. She was just a footnote now, a ghost with red lipstick and hollow victories. And me? I stayed. For a while. I started writing more, not just about my father, but about loss, about resilience, about the ways people vanish and the echoes they leave behind. My story was no longer just mine. It was a lighthouse for others adrift in their own darkness. One day, I found one of my father's notebooks. It was tucked inside a box in the attic of the cabin I now owned. The pages were old, yellowed, the ink smeared in places, and in the middle of it, between journal entries about work and weather and nothing important, there was a sentence that broke something wide open in me. I don't know how to be a father to her anymore, but God, I hope she forgives me one day. I sat on the wooden floor and let the tears come, not because it changed anything, not because it fixed the past, but because for the first time, I felt like I could let it go. He had failed me. He had broken me. But maybe in some small, cowardly way he had known. And maybe that would have to be enough. I stood up, dusted off my jeans, and stepped outside into the light, the wind catching my hair like it was carrying something away. And I let it.